Hello there. Um, this one is walk blamelessly in their world. You know, their world because it's not our kingdom. You know, um, we're in the world but not of the world, and of course that is meant far more realistically than most people give it credit for. If you remember the video, SNEOS, in the world not of the world, oil and water, the remaining separate. But anyway, walk blamelessly in their world, though. It's very, very important because once you begin to speak truth, you make yourself the natural enemy of the world. And so if you say or do anything that is wrong in the sight of the world, they'll capitalize on it and judge you for it. And the main attempt on the part of the adversary is to nullify the truth that you say. That's the ultimate goal, to nullify whatever you say that actually is true in any way that it can be nullified for as many people as possible in the world whom the adversary does not want to heed to what is actually true. Now, the tricky part is that a lot of people will quote Romans 13 and say you submit to the authority because it's put in place by the will of the Almighty, etc., etc. So just call to their attention when they do that, Inquisition, Crusades, Nazism, etc., etc. They submitted to the authority by getting on the train, you know. And the time's coming when there will be trains again, and, you know, we are not to submit to authority, or we will be receiving the mark of the beast. So obviously we're not going to submit to their orders when they command us to do as the Almighty Himself commanded us not to do. So, you know, that's not what I mean by walking blamelessly or not doing what's wrong in their sight. I'll give you an example. Because we will keep the commands of the Almighty no matter what, even if we have to wind up dying for it, like, you know, back in the day when people were being fed to lions, etc., etc. We keep the commands of the Almighty and the testimony of Yahshua. That's primary. What I mean by walk blamelessly in their world is, I'll give an example. In Eugene, Oregon, I was there once, and dreadlock street kid friend I met who had a dog was with me, and we were walking down the street, and we had a bunch of spiritual conversations together. And Eugene, Oregon, has so many other cities throughout the U.S., nowadays especially, but even back then, was known for having very brutal, unconstitutional police. Just very, very against people's rights, brutal, harsh stuff, you know. And so we're walking down the street, and I was explaining to him some things about this subject, and we came to a crosswalk, and I stopped, and he kept walking. And I was like, well, it says don't walk. And he said, yeah, but I'm free. I'm not going to follow the laws of the Babylon system. And he kept walking. You know, a lot of them get this stuff from bad influences, music and false idols within music and stuff, and that's a whole different subject. But anyway, and so I went ahead so he wouldn't be alone in it, and I ran and was next to him, and we walked across the street, and then when we got to the other side and kept walking, all of a sudden a police pulls up, and he gets out of the car, and out of all the police in Eugene, Oregon, bless the Almighty for His compassion, it happened to be one, you know, a needle in a haystack. It happened to be one that was actually uncorrupted by the shiny piece of metal on his shirt. You know, he was a decent being, and I was so thankful that the lesson from the Almighty would come through such compassion. He walked up and he said, just to let you know, when you crossed that street, a car had to stop and wait, even though he had a green light. It's technically illegal. I see that your dog doesn't have a license, and technically I could take your dog. Just to let you know, the rules are in place for a reason, for as much your safety as anyone else's and everything. And so if you could kindly, obey these rules, I'm not going to do anything about it, but any other officer just about coming along would do everything about it. You just happened to run into me, which I already knew this as soon as he walked up and began to speak, that this was the case. And we kept walking down the street, and I didn't want to say anything like "told you so" or anything like that. I'm not like that. So the way in for it was, wow, we really got blessed with that disposition. I mean, he was the one in a million that would be so kind. And he's like, yeah, I guess you were right about what you were saying. I need to pay more attention. So here's what I mean by walk blamelessly in their world. Subtle things. I'm not talking about, you say, do, or think or feel anything that you know is contrary to the will of the Almighty. By no means, heaven forbid. I'm just saying that there are reasonable expectations that must be maintained if you're on the path to sainthood, and that's the goal. Then you will just do everything right, or that is your goal, is to one day do everything right. And it's not so much in the eyes of the world at all. It doesn't matter what the world thinks, but what portions of within the world are in place appropriately. You're not just going to bucket or go against simple things like that to draw attention to yourself as being rebellious against what is viewed as being lawful and appropriate and understandable, whether in the eyes of the world or not. You're always in the eyes of the Almighty. And every moment that you live and everything that you speak and even think is Judgment Day, because it will be replayed. If you think of every moment as your Judgment Day, the angels are watching, etc., then it should help caution you into what you say, think, feel, or do. Another example is working. If you're not putting your all behind your labor wherever you work, then they're going to notice that, and the penalties will come against you. Might wind up getting laid off and stuff, and who knows what. Times are hard. Keep up your appearance and zeal behind whatever you do. And I'm not trying to attribute anything for or against anything that happened to be written by anyone before in the past. It's not about who wrote what when it comes to anyone other than Yahshua, who is our example. But I'm just saying that, reasonably speaking, we have to learn to walk blamelessly and speak blamelessly, because we can't give any foothold to the beast and the adversary to use against us, as if anything that we say couldn't be counted as true or worthy to be heeded or listened to, and they will pick anything they can, anything at all. So, within reason, within the frame of always following the Almighty in the path, also walk blamelessly in this world in everything you say or do. Don't give the adversary a reason to condemn anything else you might say in the eyes of anyone present, because there's always someone there in every crowd who's going to do everything they possibly can against truth, if not the whole crowd itself. It depends on where you're at. And in many, many, many situations across the whole U.S., when I used to live that way, traveling and speaking to people city to city, I noticed these things. And so it really is important to walk blamelessly in the sight of the Almighty, but when it fits within the world and how they observe you and how they judge also,